I think we talked a little bit about the different options in medicine, and I think a case can be made for this. And the fact that this system is fragile, just think about in 1989 or 88, did anybody know how fragile the Soviet system was? A few people. It was predicted by the great economist Mises that it would collapse because socialism doesn't work. But the welfare warfare state doesn't work either, and the monetary system we have doesn't work either. So I would say that the motivations to do something about it will come soon, and it won't be as easy as just saying, well, just pump more money in it. The transitions can be developed, but you have to get some tough priorities. And to me, the most enticing priority would quit spending money overseas, because we don't have the money, and we can save a lot, and we could take care of the people's needs. And I'm not for, even though some of these programs should have never been started, and as I said earlier, I've never voted to spend one penny out of Social Security. But I think you should pick priorities. People who are dependent, medical dependency or educational dependency, take care of that. I had one amendment once that cut $1 billion out of the foreign, in the military program. We're spending nearly $1 billion building an embassy in Baghdad. It's bigger than the Vatican. And it has a 30-foot thick wall around it. So I struck $1 billion, put $500 million against the deficit, and put $500 million into some domestic programs that I might not truly believe in, but I believe in a transition. So you can get more money, solve some of these problems under Medicare, taking care of the elderly, save some money against the deficit, at the same time having a goal toward working for less government and not more government.
Got another email question for you, Congressman. Environmental question. This one comes from Dawn Zidney of Dover. She writes, global warming is already occurring, and without significant action to reduce carbon emissions within the next decade, scientists predict that the consequences could be severe and potentially irreversible. What would you do to help reduce global warming? Congressman?
Well, as a president, I wouldn't be president of the world. And I wouldn't assume that responsibility, so there'd be a lot of problems out there to deal with. I think education is very important. I think there's plenty of debate about global warming, and there's debate on both sides of this. I think if it would make sense to me never to subsidize hydrocarbons. Yet we do. We had an energy bill passed not too long ago that, although there were some good parts in there because it was lower taxes and other things, but there were also subsidies to big corporations. And we literally subsidize hydrocarbons by saying, well, we got to protect the oil. You know, come in and spending all these hundreds of billions of dollars protecting the oil, which compounds our problems. But, I was raised in the city of Pittsburgh, and when I was a kid during World War II, there were days when you didn't see the sky, till noontime or so, because it was so black from soot. And that city cleaned up a long time before EPA, because people dealt with these problems with property rights and the city ordinance and city control. And they say, you can't do this. It was our rejection of the principle of private property during the Industrial Revolution, where big corporations and governments colluded to give them excuse. In Pittsburgh, the government sewage was dumped in the rivers. Our governments still pollute a lot. Sometimes government's polluting more than private industry. But this whole idea that anybody has the right to pollute with hydrocarbons or emissions is wrong. And yet they were excused for a long, long time, and they still are excused, even though our solution, instead of going back to a property rights solution, they go back to the bureaucracy. If we just had an EPA, everybody's guilty until proven innocent, and we'll write the laws without congressional approval that we're going to solve this problem. But I think there are times when it would be very legitimate. We're close to Canada. There's no reason why we can't talk to Canadians, the United States, in dealing with some of these, when you share rivers and share air. This is one time where I think an understanding between two countries, a lot different than world government. And the same way with Mexico, this is very, very important. So you take care of your own responsibilities, your personal responsibilities, protect your property, never damage somebody else's property. You do this in the city like they did in Pittsburgh, you do it within the state, and then you have a federal responsibility to deal international with borders.
Let's go back to the audience. We have another audience question. Oh, great. Oh, you're right here. Tell us your name, where you're from.
Chris Jones from Meredith, New Hampshire. Congressman, just to get to know you a little bit better, if you were not running right now for office, is there a current candidate that you would identify with most? Hence, who would you vote for yourself?
He asked whether I can identify with another candidate, assuming that I am not a candidate. Not wholly, but I have. But there's been some who have hinted that they might run, who have had sort of an enlightenment with foreign policy, and that's Chuck Hagel. You know, he's talking about a more humble foreign policy, which we had been promised, but we don't have. And he has some military experience. But the truth is I don't know a lot about his other programs. But since foreign policy to me is so important, I would look at what his views are. And on the Democratic side, it just happens that Dennis Kucinich is a good friend of mine, and his views, and he's an honest person. And when he when we were dealing with Kosovo, the Democrats were in charge, but he resisted it. But of course, the Republicans resisted it strongly. You know, this is interesting. Now that I bring that subject up, when the Kosovo War was going on, there was a vote in Congress to delete spending. You know, like they pretended that they might do with not supporting this escalation. And those of us objected, were unpatriotic and not supporting the troop. Well, there was a vote, and 108 Republicans against 48 Republicans voted to stop funding for the war going on in Kosovo. And all of a sudden, those are the same people who are saying that if I say that in Iraq, you know, I'm not protecting the troops. The point being, though, that Dennis has been on both, you know, he's been consistent on this, and therefore I would think that he's a decent candidate, although he is a Democrat right now, but on the Republican side it would be more Chuck Hagel.
Congressman, let's jump off the campaign trail for a minute. Let me ask you a little bit about being back home. You were sharing with me before we began the show today that you sometimes play second fiddle to the missus and her cookbook. Share with us that story.
Oh, my goodness, yes. Okay. I was telling the story that one of the things we do in our district, it was mentioned earlier that I have a large family and 17 grandchildren and one more coming soon. And 3 of our kids are in medicine. But my wife claims she doesn't know anything about politics. But we were in a very, very tough race, and since I have these kooky libertarian ideas that you should be left alone, let alone, and not be molested by your government, they say, well, he's such a bad guy. And they did some pretty nasty stuff to me, both Republicans and the Democrats, although I was running as a Republican. She came up with this idea of a cookbook. She said, well, let's send a cookbook out, have our house, you know, our family recipes in there, and put pictures of all our kids. Well, and I tell this to my audiences down at home. I said, oh, I strongly objected to this. I said, now what would people want to look at a cookbook and family pictures about? I said, they want me to talk about the Exchange Stabilization Fund and the IMF and the Federal Reserve. And I tell the crowd that, and I said, well, I finally decided we'll try it. Turned out that the cookbook became the most popular thing we ever did in the district. And when we go about the district, sometimes people will come up and they'll know her picture because she and I are on the front, but they'll recognize her, and they'll come over to talk to her, and I say, what do you mean? I'm the congressman. What are you talking about her for?
Does she remind you about the story of convention you and it being
I have to play second fiddle.
Well, Congressman, thank you very much for your time.